Everything that I do as an architect, as a building developer working with project owners is about helping them make decisions. We want the thing in the end to be as amazing as it can be and look really cool and all that stuff, but we have to make so many decisions along the way that inform the reasons of why we're doing what we're doing more than what it looks like, because that's such a surface level discussion and everybody's got so many different opinions about it. We have to get to the core reason of what it is that we're really trying to do, what's our deepest intent, and then dealing with all the different factors involved, the different people involved, the different decisions you have to make about where you spend your money, how you spend your time, how fast do we need to open this, whatever the decisions are. This book, Getting to Yes, is really about helping understand how to break decisions down and negotiate. This is a negotiation book that's taught by a lot of different law schools. It was really written about and originally released back in the 80s. And the edition I have is the third edition. And I think it just speaks to the longevity of the ideas that they're being writing about in this book and how it's just continually updated. But the fundamentals are always the same. In the book, they talk about four different points to apply. And the number one thing is to be really hard on problems, but really soft on people. And I found this to be really helpful for me, both dealing with contractors, dealing with different owners, especially when you have ownership teams, is that people can get very emotional or people inherently have their own opinions and biases. So being able to be empathetic to them and understand them in a very, human to human way, while also being really hard on things that just aren't reasonable or aren't right or just aren't the right thing to do. For instance, with contractors, negotiating things or if they do something that just isn't right, trying to get out of it by asking them to asking you to trust them or making sort of excuses. The fundamental thing is that if there's a problem, we need to be really hard on that and extremely empathetic to them. And so by actually separating these two ideas, it helps us both be really nice, empathetic people, but not pushovers at all. And I think by being both of them, both of those aspects, by being really hard on problems, but also very empathetic, I think that's a really fair and reasonable way, and probably a very good way just to live life. The second main point they talk about is focusing on interests, not positions. So, not digging into something and saying it has to be a certain way, but really trying to understand their fundamental issue that they need out of the negotiation. So, for instance, they use the example of an orange. And even though you might only have one orange, somebody might want it for the fruit on the inside to eat, and somebody might want it for the skin or the rind on the outside for cooking or something like that. And so it isn't always exclusive that you need the exact same thing. In fact, for the most part, you need different things if you're in different positions. So if you're the owner or the contractor or even on an ownership team, if you're working in one division of a company or the other, or you're working on the budget versus the sort of vision, you might have different, well, you probably almost certainly have different focuses that you are really trying to get out so that you can look at your job as being done really successfully. And so a big part of this idea of focusing on interests, not positions, is trying to understand like the deepest requirements that we all have. And this, I always talk about going a few layers deep because it might not even be what they're saying. It might not even be what's being discussed on the surface. But if we can really get past the position of this is my best and final. The whole point of this book is really kind of trying to get away from this is what it is or this is what I need and trying to actually understand what we do need versus what we can be more flexible with. The third point is to invent multiple options. And the idea is to be creative. And I always think to be good at anything, creativity is key. And this is where that idea of a playful mindset comes from. Think of a lot of ideas, a lot of different solutions. Go wide. This is the moment to actually go wide, not hone in on just one thing. Again, thinking of what your deepest interest is. Like, what is the thing that you actually need? Because what you'll probably find and what they talk about is that you probably have a lot of overlap in certain areas, maybe less in others, but things that you can give to them so that you can get something that you really care about more deeply. And this can often lead to a much more amicable and efficient process in terms of getting to a negotiated agreement. The fourth key point they talk about is using objective criteria. So, depending on what it is that you're doing, I'll just use myself as an example. We have hundreds of thousands of buildings are built every year all over the world, and or even in your local area. There's data for that. We have cost books that can help us understand sort of objectively what things generally cost. And you can do this to sort of any product or service if you need to. And so by having some sort of objective criteria that you can both sides can agree on, it can help you have a baseline that gets away from more opinionated points of view, or I think this or I want that, because that, how are you negotiating with that? If you can have a baseline like a fair market value or some other metric that you can use and agree on as a standard, whether it's a professional standard or even a legal standard. Like if you do that, can we agree that this will go to court and probably end up in a certain way? You know, there are different sort of objective standards that, again, are hard on the problem and take the people out of it. You're negotiating with a person, whether you like the person or not, is sort of irrelevant in this book, the way they talk about it. Whether you trust them or not is not relevant, because the whole point is to be extremely hard on the problem, because then you're not a pushover. It can sound, I think, at first glance like you're maybe bending more than you initially might think you should, but it's actually quite the opposite. What you're doing is really trying to figure out what you really care about and then never bending on that. You're never bending on being pushed around. You can bend on the principle, you can bend on things that you agree with or different or don't agree with, but you're never bending on just because somebody wants something. You're never bending to bullying. And these are all strategies to sort of make a reasonable person say, yes, this is the criteria we can make a decision with. You know, these are things that even with difficult people, you can agree on. And I've used this sort of way of working or way of thinking, whether it's with contractors or whether it's with owners. Hey, if you objectively, if you want more space for your part of the business, you need to, like, wouldn't it be reasonable for you to show us in a model and in a series of assumptions that it's actually going to work out well for the business overall? Like, you can take the person out of it rather than just saying, I want me, which is, you know, sounds very childish, frankly. Getting away from that way of discussing and negotiating things, because again, in my world, whether a building is gigantic or whether a building is small, you're negotiating for every square foot. And in your world, whatever that is, that's the way it works. And so being able to figure out ways and strategies to pull the people out of it. But at the same time, this brings us to another point, which is understanding your best alternative. So sometimes you just are dealing with difficult people, or sometimes you may have an aspiration, but you realize maybe it's not going to be possible to get there. A lot of times we'll make a building, we'll make a design that's very ambitious, and it just might not be possible from a cost point of view. So understanding what's the fallback plan, what's our best possible alternative that we're comfortable with, it gives us a flexibility to realize that if we have to eject, if we have to pop shoot and just bail out, if the person's being unreasonable, what's our alternative? So it's not that you're committed, you're trying to be empathetic and you're trying to be principled. They call this principled negotiation. You're trying to be principled. You're trying to take the individual out of it. You're trying to be empathetic to them. You're not fighting them. You're trying to help them. You're trying to make a decision easy to come to. You're trying to get them to say yes in a way that they actually feel good about. So they talk about taking these 4 principles and applying them to 3 stages. The first stage being to diagnose the problem. And that's really thinking about it from your point of view, but also from their point of view. You know, the idea of diagnosing before you prescribe anything. And this is very much what I do with clients. When I'm talking with clients at first about their building project or their business, I don't know what they need. I don't know what they need from me. I don't know if they need anything from me. I don't know if they need advising or drawings or nothing, or they can go somewhere else. Frankly, my interest is diagnosing the problem properly. And I think that is the fundamental issue that they bring up here as well. The second step is planning, which is really about generating ideas, like seeing what these different divergent ideas could be based around the core principles and the core things that you need to happen. Otherwise, you might walk away and bail out to your best alternative. And the third part they talk about is the discussion. And this is really just communicating back and forth to actually get to agreement. So notice how that's the third thing. That's not where you start. That's the third thing after you've diagnosed it objectively. You've thought through what might happen. And once you're actually in discussion, it's important to remember the people problem, as they call it, because A lot of what ends up happening, what they point out, is that perception is often the real issue. So if we can remove ourselves and other individuals out of it and try to get to the core objectives, it can help us get past the perception. Maybe things people aren't saying, but they might be thinking about you or your side of the business or the future or whatever it is. So again, by sort of boiling off a lot of the less tangible aspects, the less objective aspects, so that we can really focus on what we both need, both sides need to get to yes in an easier way. That's really what this is all about. And they're just pointing out that perception is often a huge part of miscommunication or assumptions and things like that. And we might not even know that, which is why it's so important just to sort of push it out of the way, because you don't know what you don't know. And everybody's got their own series of perceptions. So in the discussion, they talk about how you can basically get a mutually advantageous agreement based on these objective standards and resolving the opposed interests. So looking for what you share, resolving things you don't share, like trying to figure out a way to meet in the middle enough or trade or whatever it is, to create a mutually advantageous agreement. And this is often something that is actually based in the differences. So something that they don't care about that you do care about. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the idea that, something that is a difference is actually the opportunity for the getting to yes idea. And I see this again in a lot of ways where somebody might need something very specific in a building. Somebody else might not care about that as much, or things might overlap as in, hey, I just need a space for X, Y, or Z. Okay, well, do you need it every day? Well, maybe not. So maybe there's ways that you can fit things in and give people exactly what they're looking for, even though it might not be in, say, a dedicated space or something like that. So I'm just pointing out that these sort of negotiating tactics, that's why I look at this as a real design manual, because it really is a way of thinking about getting to agreement with different parties, whether that's different sides of the table or even on the same side of the table. So if we can get through these stages, the plus of it is that if we're separating the people from the problem and are dealing empathetically with the other human while being extremely hard on the problems at hand, it's a way that can often lead to a very amicable outcome, because you're also putting yourself in their shoes. You're trying to understand their side of the table. You're trying to understand how to get them what they really need. What's their deepest issue? Is there a way that you can help get them what they actually need so that they feel successful in a way that you are actually happy with? So you're actually trying to help them get to an agreement that they're happy with in a way that you're also happy with. And I think there's a negative side to that where you're sort of playing mind games, or like certainly a negative side, but a side of it. But assuming this is done in good faith and watching out for sort of malevolent people on the other side, which happens, I think that there's an important aspect here, which is like what you're really trying to do is by putting yourself in their shoes. It's like helping other people helps you in a roundabout way. So by putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand what they need so that they can go back to their boss, or they can go back to their team, or their part of the company, or their area of it, if they're the one controlling the budget, or if they're the one running the kids programming, or whatever it might be, getting them a way to say, yes, I got what I need out of this, or I got enough of it in a way that you actually are happy with. Again, this is my role often as a developer and architect, is the pie is only so big, or the budget's only so big. So like, what can we do to get enough out of it, get the most out of it in the best possible way? And that's again where this negotiating tactic in the design process, and often before really any drawings are done, it's still part of the design process, but it's not necessarily in a drawing. So the goal is really that throughout this process, you're inching closer and closer to a decision, so that by the time you actually go through these core issues, by the time you talk through what you need, what they need, the deepest intent they have, and like what they really need, by putting yourself in their shoes and again, being super empathetic to their needs as a human, but also really very hard on the principle of it, not bending at all on principle, not being pushed around. They talk about how it actually is somewhat confusing, because you're not a bully, you're not being mean, you're being completely fair, because you're being objective and empathetic, but also being very principled in yourself as a person, as well as yourself from a business point of view. And the whole idea here is that By using also things like precedent and by going through this process, what you're really doing is making it easier for them to say yes because you're checking the boxes that they're concerned about. So rather than just doing a take it or leave it, this is what it is, by going through this negotiating process and this communication part of it, you're really trying to get them to see how they're reducing their own risk. They don't want to be the one who gets in trouble for making a bad decision, whether it's a government. I deal with this a lot with permitting, for instance, in buildings. If you can show someone that you've already done this before or that this is why we're saying this, and you can de-risk them from being the one who is in trouble if something goes wrong, that usually makes it easier, frankly, to get what we're looking for while helping them. You're just showing them why they don't need to worry about it as much as a person, but also objectively by using criteria, objective criteria, by holding to principles. And so by the end of that process, it actually can often be an easy decision. Of course, yeah, there is no problem. Like, yes, the answer is yes. And it can actually feel like it's a very natural part of the process is that yes, is of getting, yeah, actually that is what we talked about, no problem, yes, moving forward. In the book, they use an architect dealing with a couple as an example. And in my case, I deal with businesses, so I'm dealing with ambitious, large commercial projects that have to balance business and excitement and venues and all these different things. So in any case, in the example as an architect, it's interesting the way that they use it because what they point out is that if you come to someone with a drawing and say, whether it's a couple or a team, and you say, hey, here's this drawing, I'm not happy with it, but I'd like your criticism on it. I would like you to tell me what you like or don't like. You're not asking them to say yes. You're not asking them for a commitment. You're not asking them to marry you on the first date, but you're asking for criticism. And that's a very low commitment. And I think what they point out is that people are happy to do that. People are happy to criticize. Getting them to overcommit is harder. So by giving them options, by going through iteration, by getting them out of this sort of positional bargaining, meaning like I'm entrenched here, this is what I need, by getting them to just continue to iterate with you, that's a way that you can get them closer and closer to a point where by the time you actually make a suggestion, by the time you actually say, I think that based on everything we've talked about, this whole process that we've gone through, this is the thing we should do. That should actually, again, feel very natural and fairly easy. And maybe they want it to be contingent on the other person. Like, well, if they agree, I'll agree. That's fine. But the point is that you're not just showing them something and going from 0 to 100 saying, take it or leave it, yes or no. You're saying through the process of conversation and focusing on what you're trying to do and what you care about versus what the other person can give up or back and forth that way, by the time you actually get to the point where you say, hey, here's the building, this is what I think we should do. And in my case, this is exactly how I do it because what I end up doing is going from conversation, maybe some sketches, to about this kind of stuff, to actually seeing what that might look like as a building. At a certain point, you have to actually put the flag in the ground and say, this is a building. And that's a big jump. But if we do this process right, it actually makes sense. And people can look at it and say, yeah, that actually is the thing we talked about. I didn't know what it would look like, but that could be it. And that also goes back to the idea of having a lot of options. So I also would not usually start with, hey, this is one option. Here's 2 or 3 options that I think do the thing that we talked about. I'm not asking you to pick one. I'm just asking you to give me critique on it. And then, a lot of my job is actually working through what to boil off, what to combine, what works, what doesn't work, and things like that. But by the time we actually go through the process, they should feel like they're not having to make a decision too quickly. They should feel like it actually feels very natural. And generally speaking, that's the whole part in all of this, whether it's in legal negotiation or in my case, building development and design, it feels pretty natural and people come along and they understand what's going on and how you got there. Another example they use in the book is at Camp David, where Israel and Egypt were negotiating. And it was held over 13 days and 23 drafts were handed back and forth, not asking for agreement, but asking for criticism only. And by the time the mediators felt like they couldn't improve it anymore, it was recommended, as in, here's what we recommend based on everything we've done. And it was accepted by both parties. And so they have a lot of different examples in the book. I'm just pointing this out as This is a way of getting to yes, I think in any aspect of life. In my case, I am looking at it as someone who helps businesses and puts buildings together and develops projects over many years. It's a lot of different people who are involved. And this is a constant issue of if you just show up and barrel your way through. I work with other architects. I work with contractors, different owners. It's not in my interest. It's not in my interest to tell people what to do. I'm trying to help them get what they need while the owner's getting what they need. And I'm really just trying to quarterback the whole thing as that third party. And this is a very different way of practicing architecture than certainly what I was trained in. But I found a lot of benefit to the power of this style of principled negotiation, both as someone managing projects as well as designing actual buildings and trying to extract the true essence of the goal and the intent of what a project actually is. So I hope that's helpful. I couldn't recommend this book more to anybody, really. I think this helps personally. I think it helps professionally. You're living as an empathetic person while also being someone who sticks to your principles. And by being able to sort of hold those maybe two ends of the spectrum uh, in mind simultaneously, I think that's a really great place to be because you can feel good about being kind, but also feel good that you are being yourself. So I hope that's helpful. Please like and subscribe if it is, and I look forward to the next video with you. Thanks.